Tonight on It's a Filthy Goddamn Horror Show.
Even people who haven't seen the movie are aware of that scene, and who hasn't had that thought when they're in the shower?
Well, your girl locks the door. The house is basically a pile of kindling, and he is the match.
Not just hallucinating a person, it's a shadow person, and they're here to hurt you.
So free therapy for everybody today, I guess, but...
I think that's what I would do if I committed a crime. I'd be like, wait, I gotta change my underwear color.
We're literally just gonna snap people's arms in half, and their bones are gonna rip out.
It's so insane and unhinged a moment.
He has that condition. He literally has to sleep in a sleeping bag.
I would sleep in a padded room.
Do you know anything about the serial killer Ed Gein?
What I was not expecting was that the killer lives in the back of her head.
It's a filthy goddamn horror show.
Welcome to It's a Filthy Goddamn Horror Show, a trivia variety show for and by American Horror Story fans where we take a sidewinding journey through topics inspired by episodes of American Horror Story. This is my kindred soul, Nathan Skethway.
And this is my goddess and personal deity, Monique Quistorf.
When you hear the word or the term mommy issues, like what movie, like what iconic horror movie just comes to mind?
It's two different movies for me. The first one is the Friday the 13th series, because I remember as a terrified second grader being forced by his best friend to watch those movies at midnight in his bedroom. I was shocked and then furious to find out that the mom was the villain in the first one. And now that has always just stuck with me, is that like that entire franchise of Jason killing people, and technically it's all just fueled by his mommy issues and his evil mother. But the other one is absolutely Psycho, I would say.
Well, the topic that I'm covering this week is mommy issues, and this was inspired by basically the propellant of the horror in Murder House is, you know, as soon as the Langdons get there and Tate has this complicated relationship with Constance, and then he dies in the house, and then he's there forever. The house obviously had its own pull of darkness before that, but now here's Tate, who the house is basically a pile of kindling, and he is the match, just setting everything on fire, trying to please, Mrs. Montgomery, like the matriarch ghost of the house, where he couldn't have this relationship with his own mother. So he is doing everything he can to bring new people into the home to give Mrs. Montgomery a baby, and just unleashing all carnage when it doesn't work out, because he is so eager and desperate to find that motherly acceptance. So this week, of course, I had to watch Psycho. And I should say I had to rewatch Psycho, because I did have a period in my recent history where I became very obsessed with Freddie Highmore, who plays Norman Bates in Bates Motel. So I watched it in its entirety. It was it was thrilling and titillating. And then I have this curiosity to watch Psycho to see how I can compare and contrast. But this time, knowing everything I know about Psycho, knowing the twist ending, and Psycho is such an iconic movie that perhaps I'm not going to spend very, very much time talking about the movie itself, but the fun facts about the movie that I found that I thought were really interesting.
Psycho is one of my very favorite movies, and Hitchcock is my favorite director, so I'm so excited.
So this was Hitchcock's first horror film, but his last movie filmed in black and white, and it was his highest grossing movie of his entire career. The main actress who plays Marion, Janet Leigh, only took baths for the rest of her life after seeing herself on film doing the shower scene, because she realized how vulnerable people are while they're showering.
Oh, God. I mean, who hasn't... Even people who haven't seen the movie are aware of that scene, and who hasn't had that thought when they're in the shower?
Well, your girl locks the door. Okay? So... I lock the door, and then I don't have to have that worry at all. And to even just like, I lock the front door too. And any other door in the house, not just the bathroom door. All doors are locked.
But that wouldn't have helped her because she was at a hotel, so he had the key.
Oh, that's true.
That's the thing.
I haven't been spending very much time in hotels and motels recently.
Fair.
Or even pre-pandemic, I don't spend a lot of time sleeping other places where I am at someone else's. What is the thing I'm trying to say? Where I'm at a place where someone could easily access me without like my consent or my control. So I found some like really like just intense characteristics that speak to, I think, Hitchcock as a creator, as a director. He mandated and wrote into theater contracts that no one arriving after the start of each showing of the movie would be admitted into the theater until the beginning of the next showing, because the advertising network deceived audiences into thinking that Janet Leigh was the star of the movie. And he also like withheld the ending of the movie from cast and crew until it needed to be shot. And he even bought the rights of the novel from Robert Bloch, and then bought as many copies of the novel as he could to keep the ending a secret.
That's insane. That is dedication.
So just to kind of, touch a little bit more on mommy issues, real life mommy issues, it is said that Hitchcock had a troubled relationship with his mother as well, who forced him to stand at the foot of her bed and tell her everything that happened to him during the day.
Oh, God.
So obviously his relationship with his mother isn't as intense as Norman's is with his mother, or...
Well, let's hope.
As any of the sons in American Horror Story, but just it's a little interesting to think about, like I said, the real life perspective that Hitchcock had making this movie. I'm sure you already know this, but Hitchcock made a cameo in Psycho.
Oh, of course. Hitchcock makes a cameo in every single one of his movies. He always walks by. He's usually a guy on the street, and he walks by the camera. Sometimes he's reading a newspaper. In
this movie, he wanted to get it done like as soon as possible so that people wouldn't be looking for him and just focus on the plot. But he's standing out front when Marion comes into work at the bank, and he isn't walking. He's standing wearing a cowboy hat.
He's wearing a cowboy hat? I didn't remember that. I haven't seen this one in a minute.
Did you know that Walt Disney refused to allow Hitchcock to film at Disneyland because he made Psycho?
Really? I had no idea.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Why did Hitchcock want to film at Disneyland?
He didn't want to film for Psycho at Disneyland. He wanted to film something else. And Walt Disney was like, you made that really horrendous horror film before, so we're not letting you here. You can't come here. This is a family place, Hitchcock.
That's amazing.
Janet Leigh only had 3 weeks to work on the movie and spent an entire week filming just the shower scene. The scene used 70 different camera angles and was originally supposed to be silent in the film. I found some interesting things about Bernard Herrmann, who was the composer for the movie, just wrote a scene anyway, and Hitchcock loved it. Mm-hmm. He loved this and every, I think it's all strings in the movie. He felt like he owed so much of the suspense to the music that Bernard Herrmann had made that he doubled the salary. Or doubled the payment to Bernard Herrmann. I don't know what you call it.
Bernard Herrmann gets the second to last credit in the opening credits.
Oh.
He is the last person before directed by Alfred Hitchcock to show up, which is, I have never seen that in another movie before. Usually with opening credits, usually the composer is one of the first production credits after the cast list. But this is the first time, and potentially the only time, that I've seen it put in a spot of prominence, which, with opening credits, the closer you get to the end, it's like the bigger the job gets. So usually second to last is screenwriter or producer or something like that, but this is the only time that I've seen it as the composer, which I think is amazing that he was like, this guy is so important to this movie.
I didn't go into this much research, but it would be interesting to see like where in the influence of music and horror and suspense did Psycho fall, and how much of what we do now is owed to this movie.
Oh my God, so much.
Marion wears a white bra and has a white purse before she steals the money, and then wears a black bra and has a black purse to show the crime that she has changed because of the crime that she has committed.
I think that's what I would do if I committed a crime. I'd be like, wait, I gotta change my underwear color.
I'm different now. So Anthony Perkins, who is the actor who played Norman Bates, was typecasted after accepting the role, but he never regretted accepting the role, and he was paid $40,000 for his performance, which was the amount of money that Marion stole from the bank.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
And did you know that Norman Bates was written in the book to be fat, short, older, and very dislikable, but Hitchcock decided to have him be young, handsome, and sympathetic, which I think speaks volumes to the real life, like, psychopathic serial killers that we've seen in our since then in our recent culture. And just to kind of, just like sprinkle like a little extra topping for the importance of the mother figure in the Mother Issues iconic movie, there was a canvas chair with Mrs. Bates displayed on the set throughout, even though there was no actress who played Mrs. Bates.
Oh, that's weird.
Right?
That's really cool, though. Love it. I love Psycho so much.
So let's talk about mommy issues.
Let's.
What are mommy issues? Difficulties from childhood resulting from strained, complicated, traumatic relationships with maternal figures can carry over into adulthood. And as we see in Psycho, in American Horror Story, in real life, having difficult traumatic relationships with mothers can negatively impact relationships with romantic partners and children. So, these complicated relationships with mothers are often caused by mother's abuse, manipulation, or failure to provide emotional support. Can also result from overprotective or overly permissive mother-child dynamics. So moms doing all the chores and looking the other way when a child makes mistakes, or worked really hard to be like a friend or a confidant instead of being a mother. Like, that can create mommy issues too. I think it's important that we talk about the traits and behaviors of mommy issues. So I think when we think about romantic relationships, like, one of the most difficult, I won't say that because every part of this is difficult, but maybe one of the more like covert symptoms, because it's like societally acceptable and expected. People who have a strained or toxic relationship with their mothers will often require that their romantic partners fulfill needs that their mothers could not, usually. And usually mommy issues consist more in men. And in these like more heterosexual dynamic relationships, men will expect their wives to kind of fill the role of a wife, but also a mother. And when these roles aren't fulfilled, the partner may be rejected if they're not able to be a mother and a wife. But if they are able to be a mom to their partner, they can be idealized, which is also a really like uncomfortable dynamic to have in a romantic relationship. Trust issues, a strong need for affection or approval, but also a difficulty showing affection and like a rapid back and forth between those two characteristics. A need for maternal guidance when making decisions. Difficulty spending time with or discussing their mother. Relationship anxiety, discomfort with intimacy, extreme sensitivity to real or perceived criticism, underdeveloped relationship boundaries, and a habit of dating people who share certain similarities with their mother. So these are all traits of someone who might be experiencing quote unquote mommy issues.
I think there's a point to be made. Is there any mother-child relationship that probably doesn't include a certain degree of mommy issues? I think there is not a single parent in the world who has ever gotten their job entirely correct.
The way that we can come out of this, the way that the cycle can be broken, is for, the adults, the parents, taking the time to recognize where their issues lie and working on them. And maybe doing, while you're right, there's no perfect parent. I don't believe in a perfect parent, but my idea of a perfect parent is a parent who is continually trying to do better and better. So we all have like these instinctual knee-jerk reactions that more often than not stem very, very back into our childhood, into our lizard brains, and we just let these things out and we lash out. But if we're able to take that moment and say like, oopsie, and like sit down with the child and say like, that was not okay for me to do. This is what we're going to, this is how I'm going to be better. This is how we're going to be better. Where And a lot of cases, I think, where those really pervasive mommy issues come up is when you as a child know that you're being hurt and manipulated, but you're not able to reconcile the thought of also holding that space for your mother, who is your life giver, and more than quite literally, but also like she controls your whole world. So to have this person that you know hurts you, but also refuses to acknowledge the fact that that's happening and is like very defensive and reflexive and in their own like childhood trauma, that's where like that pervasive cycle starts to happen. Is like, well, this is how adults act. So this is how I get to act.
It's your parent. Like it's the major example of adult behavior that you have. And I feel like with these issues specifically, I mean, it's probably very easy for children to just kind of accept that this is what their mother is like. And then instead of being able as a child to go, no, actually, this is toxic behavior, because what child is able to really recognize that? You internalize it instead.
You know, we can all be a little bit better to recognize where we can apologize. So free therapy for everybody today, I guess. But do you know anything about the serial killer Ed Gein?
I am familiar with him on on a name basis. I know generally that he was a serial killer, and that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre stories are quite loosely based on his crimes. But other than that, I actually, if I have researched him, I don't remember.
Okay. Well, I did research him for this week's episode, looking for, I think, a lesser known serial killer with mommy issues, because there are obviously a lot that I think are in the forefront of our popular culture that we can easily pull out and think about. Honestly, though, point at any serial killer and just like look to see, like I would doubt that any of them don't have mommy issues.
That was one of the major takeaways that I got from the first season of Mindhunter on Netflix. Was just moms.
Well, Ed Gein was born August 27th, 1906 in Wisconsin to George and Augusta Gein. Ed's mother hated his father, who was an unemployed alcoholic, but had been a carpenter, tanner, and insurance salesman at different times in his life.
Wait, a tanner as in...
Like a skin tanner.
That explains a lot. All right, continue.
It does. The family left the city that they were living in to live in isolation on a 155-acre farm in the town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. And this became the Gein family permanent residence. So Ed's mother took advantage of the farm's isolation by turning away outsiders who could have influenced her sons and Ed. And Ed only left the farm to attend school. So his mother was very religious and preached to her children about the innate immorality of the world, the evil of drinking. Ed's mother reserved time every afternoon to read to her sons from the Bible, usually selecting verses concerning death, murder, and divine retribution. So understandably, Ed was shy, and his classmates and teachers remember him as having strange mannerisms, like random laughter. He laughed at his own personal jokes, and he had poor social development, but he did fairly well in school, particularly in reading. Also, again, unsurprising to how his development played out, his mother punished him whenever he tried to make friends.
What?
Mm-hmm. So, looking into Ed's adulthood, his older brother, Henry, began dating a divorced mother of two and planned to move in with her. Henry worried about Ed's attachment to their mother and often spoke ill of her around Ed, who responded with shock and hurt. On May 16th, 1994, Henry and Ed were burning away marsh on the property, and the fire got out of control, which resulted in having to call the local fire department to come and put the fire out. But after the fire was put out and the firefighters left, Ed reported that his brother Henry was missing. But his dead body was found later lying face down in the marsh, and he had been dead for some time. It appeared that the cause of death was heart failure, since he had not been burned or injured otherwise. It was later reported by biographer Harold Schechter that Henry had bruises on his head, but the police dismissed the possibility of foul play, and the county coroner later officially listed asphyxiation as the cause of death. The theory that Henry's death was an accident was widely accepted, though no official investigation was conducted, and an autopsy was not performed. Henry's mother, Augusta, had 2 strokes after Henry died and before she died. And she died in 1945 at the age of 67. After her death, Ed boarded up rooms used by his mother in their house, leaving them untouched, while the rest of the house became increasingly squalid and not great to live in. His mother's rooms were pristine, and as she left them. I don't know if this is... I included this because I was like, this also just kind of speaks to his, like, creepy nature. After his mother's death, and when he had his own abundant amount of free time, he became interested in reading pulp magazines and adventure stories, particularly those involving cannibals or Nazi atrocities.
Oh, okay.
On the morning of November 16th, 1957, store owner Bernice Warden in Plainville, Wisconsin, disappeared. Her son, who was in law enforcement, he was like the county sheriff, told investigators that on the evening before her disappearance, Ed had been in the store and that he was to return the next morning for a gallon of antifreeze. A sales slip for a gallon of antifreeze was the last receipt written by Warden on the morning that she disappeared. So they found her decapitated body in a shed on Gein's property, hung upside down by her legs with a crossbar at her ankles, ropes at her wrists, and she was gutted like a deer. Them being able, I mean, again, her son was in law enforcement. In the town's law enforcement had communicated with his mother about Gein and his plan to come back, and then I think it was really solidified when the last thing that was purchased at her store was what he was coming back for. So they had reason to go to his place and search. So searching the house, they found whole human bones and fragments, a wastebasket made of human skin, skulls on his bedposts, female skulls, with the tops cut off, bowls made from human skulls, which maybe explains why the tops of those skulls were cut off, a corset made of a female torso skin from shoulders to waist, leggings made from human leg skin, masks made from the skin of female heads. Mary Hogan, who was another woman who had gone missing, they found a face mask in a paper bag that was her face and her skull in a box. Bernice Warden's entire head in a burlap sack and her heart in a plastic bag in front of his stove. 9 vulvae in a shoebox. A young girl's dress and the vulvas of 2 females judged to have been about 15 years old. A belt made from female human nipples, 4 noses, a pair of lips on a window shade drawstring, a lampshade made from the skin of a human face, and fingernails from female fingers.
Just jumping ahead one season, it's very clear where Bloody Face's influence comes from. Just down to the skull bowls. That's an actual detail. He hands her a bowl that is made from a skull. There are lamps made from nipples and all. It's very clear where they got the inspiration for his entire character, especially the mommy issues.
Basically, except that he's a doctor. And the way that Bloody Face gets his victims is a little bit different from how Ed Gein got some of the materials that he has in his that were found in his home. So he told investigators that while in a dazed-like state, he visited 3 local graveyards 40 different times between 1947 and 1952 to dig up graves of recently buried middle-aged women he thought resembled his mother, and took the bodies home, where he tanned their skins to make what they found in his house.
I didn't know this. I had no idea.
There's only a few people, like a handful of what is found in the home, I think, is only from people that he has actually murdered. And a large portion of it is also from bodies that he exhumed from the earth. So soon after his mother's death, he began to create a woman's suit so that he could become his mother, to literally crawl into her skin. So he did admit shooting Mary Hogan, who was a tavern owner missing since 1954, but later denied memory of details of her death. Shrunken heads, which Ed had described as relics from the Philippines sent by a cousin who had served in the islands during World War II, were determined to be human facial skins, carefully peeled from corpses and used by Ed as masks. We've already talked a little bit about Ed's influence on American horror, starting with Psycho. So Ed's story did not directly influence Psycho, but Robert Bloch was writing Psycho just 35 miles from where Ed had lived, and it was only right before he finished his book that Ed's murders came out to light. So Robert Bloch was shocked at how closely Bates's actions and motivation resembled Ed Gein's. You already mentioned the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The movie took the real-life body snatcher's obsession with human skin and used it to build a character of Leatherface. The Silence of the Lambs. This is where my brain made that instant connection of what Ed's behaviors had influenced in American horror. So Buffalo Bill's obsession with female human flesh and making suits out of his victims. There are more movies that I've never heard of before, but 3 on a Meat Hook, which came out in 1972. It tells the story of 4 young ladies whose car breaks down in a small town, and a local boy helps them, but ultimately lures them into his family's house where his father is waiting to kill them and eat them. Deranged, which came out in 1974. This is a slasher comedy drama that centers around a middle-aged Midwestern farmer whose overly religious mother dies. He keeps her corpse around, and to satiate his dark desires, begins to rob corpses from the graveyard so that he can keep his dead mother company, or that the bodies can keep his dead mother company. And Ed and His Dead Mother, 1993, a dark comedy which stars Steve Buscemi as Ed Chilton, whose hardware store owner mother dies, leaving him to inherit the business. A salesman offers to resurrect Ed's mother from the dead, to which Ed agrees. However, once she returns, she's not the same, and like a proper zombie, seeks out human flesh to eat. Yeah, and then he has to decapitate her in the end to get rid of her, because it was obviously did not go according to plan to have her come back from the dead. So I was really blown away by the amount of influence that this man's story has had on American culture. Like, we are just obsessed with people who do the worst things, and we just want to make as much content about it as we possibly can.
And here we are making content about it.
Here I am retelling his story.
All right, well, on that note, I think we will take a brief commercial break. Stick with us and we'll be back right after this message. Now, it's the part of the show where we give a shout out to an organization doing good work. Today, I thought I'd pivot to some positive examples of parenting, namely gay couples. Same-sex couples across the country still widely report discrimination from organizations who are supposed to help them in becoming parents. The Family Equality Council is an incredible resource for both current and aspiring parents from the LGBTQ community. The nonprofit provides information on family building to any individual or couple, no matter their sexual orientation or gender identity, as well as advocates for legislation protecting LGBTQ parents. Their mission includes the hope for a future where all LGBTQ families, regardless of creation or composition, live in communities that recognize, respect, protect, and value them. If you'd like to get involved, head over to their website at familyequality.org to donate or learn more. So this week's episode of American Horror Story is entitled Rubberman, largely focused on the doings and deeds and unmasking of the Rubberman character from Murder House. But we spoke a little bit earlier about whether the image and the concept of the Rubberman scares either one of us. And I think for me, he works on a level of being that visual trope of the dark figure, which we see a lot in horror. usually a silhouetted figure. They're featureless, they're faceless, they're anonymous, and that's kind of a part of why they're scary. You don't know who they are, and they're usually silent. This shows up in horror all over the place, and has always been one of those images that really unsettles me the most. Particularly in this episode, the scene where Vivian is in bed and is being terrorized by Tate as the rubber man, and also Hayden, and she looks at her window, and for just a second he steps in front of the window. So that got me thinking a little bit about that image, that trope, and why it shows up so much, and why it sticks with me personally so much, which got me researching the concept / phenomenon of shadow people. And while I was researching, I remembered a little snippet of the trailer for the movie Malignant, which just recently came out, and remembered that there seemed to be something in there just about a menacing dark figure, which, to be fair, it's a James Wan movie, and he uses imagery like that fairly often, so I figured it was probably safe. So I decided that before digging too far into shadow people, I would give Malignant a watch. Monique, have you gotten around to watching the new cinematic work that is Malignant?
Well, for the first time ever in It's a Filthy Goddamn Horror Show history, Nathan and I have watched the same movie for the purpose of talking about it on the podcast. And I have a lot that I need to say. But
I want to give you the space to just start because there's so much to go over with this movie.
I think the concept was so good. It was such a good concept. There were so many parts of the movie though where I had either no freaking idea what was going on, or I could predict every single thing that was about to happen.
Yeah.
And then there were parts of the movie, particularly at the end, when it's flash and gore for no reason, I literally, I dissociated. I left my body. I was like, I don't care about this. This is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in any horror film ever. We've talked about this before on this podcast, but I'm just going to throw it out there again. If you haven't seen Malignant, fast forward, because we cannot talk about this movie without royally spoiling the ending, because that's the entire twist is the meat of what we need to talk about. And this is such a new movie that, please, I don't want anyone to be upset with any spoilers. Skip to the end, watch the movie, and come back and hear my absolute rage. Okay? When was the turning point for you? When did you realize exactly what movie you'd gotten yourself in for? When did I figure out that they were in the same body? Right around the time I think that she started to talk to the police and was in the police station. A little bit before that, I think, where I was like, okay, this is what's happening. This is what's going on. But I can't remember the exact moment, but yeah, that's where that happened. Yeah, around that time, and then especially when the person just fell through the roof of her living room from the attic. That's when I started to be like, okay, maybe they're doing a thing where it seems like there's another killer, but actually she's been the killer the whole time and she just doesn't realize she's doing it. But that is such a trope that I was like, come on, can we not do another movie that does that? What I was not expecting was that the killer lives in the back of her head. When you see Gabriel's face earlier in the movie, when she's lying in the bed, paralyzed next to the second man who gets brutally murdered, and you can see the eye sticking. That was gruesome. I still wasn't connected. I still didn't know they were the same person. That's gross. What's going on there? I figured out really early on that he was the cancer. He was the part of her that needed to get cut out, but it did not occur to me that they just shoved him in there. He was still there, and they just sorry, yeah. We can't separate you because then she'll die too. And that all of that included his eyeballs and mouth and things that would be really, really weird. I did really like the concept though of him. Still, they haven't explained how he became dormant. Like, she just got a sister and she didn't need him anymore, but she didn't need him in the first place. Like, he was not necessary. So she just, how she was able to, like, how he went dormant and how, like, she was able to live a life without him always being there. That feels like a plot hole to me. But I really did like that concept of, like, the way he got woken was when her head got slammed into the wall. I think they could have done it better.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely differently, but definitely better to, I don't know. It felt so campy.
It got so over the top gory so fast. It's the moment that Gabriel is revealed out of the back of her head in the police station, and then she just full on slaughters everyone in the station. That was the moment where I was like, oh, we have switched movies.
Yeah.
This is a different movie now.
I hated that. I hated that, like, this tumor, this cancer in her brain suddenly, like, had the skills to acrobatically fly through the air and, like, murder 12 people in, like, 3 minutes. I was like, how?
Yeah. I will say that the direction and the blocking of that scene with all of the backward fighting was wildly impressive.
Yeah.
I would assume that they probably had a stunt double doing all of that stuff, but just the way that was done, that she was fighting backward half the time so that Gabriel could see, and just all of her movements and everything. And it's interesting because I never clocked in the trailer. We see the figure moving backwards some of the time. Like, we see that moment where she crawls up the chimney or whatever it is, or like up a chute or something. That's in the trailer, and you see that it's a backwards person crawling, but it never occurred to me that that's because they've got a whole person living back there. It's like Edward Mordrake from Freak Show, but substantially worse.
I think it's really brutal that they made it, they made Madison and Gabriel the result of a rape.
Yeah.
And that just, like, further, like, pushed the trope of, like, well, this girl got her innocence stolen, and this is what happens. You have, like, this freakish, skinny-armed, squishy, like...
The scene where they finally, in the video, like the video from when she was a kid, when they finally reveal Gabriel sticking out of her back, I screamed out loud, and then I burst out laughing, and then I screamed a little bit more because I just, like, I didn't know how to react. It's so insane and unhinged a moment. I still don't know how I feel about it because it was scary. There are a lot of scenes in this movie that are legitimately scary.
Oh, absolutely.
But it was so just fucking insane that I didn't know. I wanted to be scared, but I was also, like, on the verge of laughing the entire time because it was so crazy. And it's interesting because this concept is, I mean, at least the basics of the concept, it's not entirely new. There's a Stephen King novel and movie called The Dark Half. It's actually the first Stephen King book I ever read, which is about an author who, when he was a child, had, like, a dormant twin situation where he had absorbed his twin in the womb, but then, as has been shown to actually happen sometimes in life, as he grew, parts of that twin also grew inside him, and in The Dark Half, it's specifically in his brain. So the doctors, do their best with it, and then later in life, this guy, he's grown up to be a famous author, and he has this whole other side of him that really likes to write about dark, violent material, and he comes up with a pen name for that, and sells a bunch of books under that. And at the beginning of The Dark Half, he decides that he's going to get rid of that pen name, which is actually inspired by Stephen King's real life, because Stephen King was writing under the pen name Richard Bachman and then was outed for it. As a result, he decides that he's going to hold this whole thing where they quote unquote kill off the pen name, and they have, like, a little fake funeral for him and everything. And then, because it's a Stephen King book and we have to have supernatural stuff, as a result, the psychic energy of his twin makes that twin come to life, and, like, his alter ego of his pen name, which is this dark, scary version of him, comes to life and starts killing everybody who was involved with getting rid of the pen name. So it's a different of and equally out there, but altogether I think it's a slightly better execution overall, especially because it commits to its weirdness from the beginning, whereas Malignant was like, it was a little bit of a bait and switch, I feel like.
Absolutely.
It felt towards the beginning like I was going to get something that was more halfway between The Conjuring and Insidious, whereas this ended, just to speak more to James Wan's catalog of movies, this was a lot more like Insidious and Dead Silence, the one with the puppets, just in terms of over-the-top fucking insanity, and also maybe even Saw. Like, there was just a little bit of Saw energy going on, too.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Just, like, let's see bones popping out here and there.
Yeah.
Like, the way... So not only, like, the acrobatic actions of this backwards, and also bodies don't bend like that. You can't just like force arm, like, and for it to work, and for her to like go back to normal and be like, what happened, and not be like incredibly sore.
Yeah, she would be so broken.
You can't bend your body that way. But then he like bends, and then he's able to like spin and kick and fight in someone else's backwards body. But also, like, we're literally just gonna snap people's arms in half and their bones are gonna rip out. I'm like, why? That's not even like that was legitimately a part of the movie. I'm like, this isn't even scary anymore. It's just excessive. I don't care. This is too much.
Yeah, it's interesting that James Wan's directorial style kind of pivots between deep suspense punctuated with very jarring jump scares, but not cheap jump scares. I wouldn't say that most of his jump scares are cheap. They're usually very carefully crafted, based around intense nightmare imagery, but it's all done with a sense of like deep control. But then when it comes to violence, he is just full on balls to the wall. Let's make this as insane as we possibly can.
I mean, it made it easier for me to be like, oh, this is, I don't need to feel anything about this.
Which maybe that's the point. Maybe that's how he, as a director, chooses to handle violence, is that he doesn't want it to be too realistic. He wants it to be over the top because it's a horror movie, which I guess to some degree I understand, because realistic violence in a horror movie is just upsetting. It's never entertaining to me. I mean, violence in general is never entertaining to me, but in a horror movie specifically, like, the realistic stuff really fucks with me. But this kind of stuff, I just sort of, I don't know, you kind of phase out a little bit and you're like, oh yeah, it's a movie. But yeah, so Malignant. Having said all of this, I want to encourage anybody who likes horror movies to watch Malignant, just because it's an experience. I definitely had a lot of fun watching it, and just for the sake of hearing what people think about it. Honestly, the scariest part of that movie for me was one of the I think it was the scene where she first really, really saw him crawl toward her or something like that. But that was one of those moments of just sort of I mean, they were doing it there specifically to keep Gabriel's identity and the specifics of his features under wraps. But there were definitely some instances of the shadow person trope being used here to mask Gabriel's identity. So yeah, I just want to go into some discussion about shadow people. The ways that they're used in horror movies, some explanations as to what the real life phenomenon could be from a more logical and scientific point of view, and then some of the more out there explanations for shadow people. So to start, what are shadow people? Shadow people are a widely reported phenomenon of seeing dark, largely featureless figures. They can appear in dark places, kind of as like a your eyes are playing tricks on you sort of moment. So like you'll be in a dark basement or a dark room and you think you're seeing the outline of a person in a corner, or moving across the room. A lot of people report seeing them out of their peripheral vision at the very corners, the very sides of your eyesight, and then a lot of people report having very frightening visions of them while in bed. There are some different explanations for what causes this phenomenon, because the consensus is kind of divided on whether it's a natural phenomenon, a scientifically explainable phenomenon or whether there's something paranormal going on. So to start with, the easy explanations. Obviously, there are times where your eyes legitimately are playing tricks on you. You're seeing a shape or the shadowy combination of a couple shapes in a room, and your brain is doing its best to fill in the blanks and recognizing an image that isn't actually there. You know, our brains are wired to recognize patterns and stuff, and also specifically wired, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong because you're the person who understands brains a lot better than I do, but recognizing human shapes and faces and things like that is a thing that human brains are wired to do. So it makes sense that
absolutely
a combination of shapes, be it a jacket hanging on the back of a chair or a pile of clothes, under the right circumstances, your brain will put those shapes together and associate it with a person just because it's trying to associate it with something. This especially can happen when you're seeing something like this out of your peripheral vision, because your peripheral vision isn't designed to recognize detail. It's designed to pick up motion or just like the general layout of things. So you can see a shape or you can see a very quick movement out of your peripheral vision and you register there's movement. But if it's dark, your brain has no idea what it actually is. So again, it's one of those cases where it's trying to fill in the blanks, and sometimes it just happens to land on person, especially if you're already nervous or afraid. Beyond that, there are some still natural but more terrifying explanations, and one of these is the phenomenon of sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is a phenomenon that occurs as a person passes between waking and sleeping, in which you feel like your body is paralyzed, like you're unable to move, sometimes unable to speak, even sometimes unable to breathe, while your brain is, for the most part, totally conscious. This happens because as you go into the REM phase of sleep, your brain actually paralyzes your muscles, so that way you don't act out your dreams. And in these particular cases, people who suffer from sleep paralysis, either you are in the process of falling asleep and that particular function has happened before it's supposed to, or you're in the process of waking up and that function is lasting longer than it's supposed to. So it's just a timing issue, and it can feel terrifying and awful in the moment, but it's literally just your body clock is not the functions are not totally lined up, and you just got to give it a second to catch up. And most people are able to come out of it with a little bit of time and relaxation, and there are like exercises you can do to calm yourself down.
Do you know there are people who don't have that muscle paralyzing function and they act out their dreams?
Really?
Do you know the comedian Mike Birbiglia?
I do.
He has that condition. He literally has to sleep in a sleeping bag, a tight sleeping bag, and he has to sleep in a separate room from his family because he could like punt his children out the door. Because you're dreaming, you're sleeping, but you're acting out your dreams, and you think you're dreaming, but you're doing things in real life.
I had no idea. That's fascinating. I don't think I wouldn't be able to sleep in a tight sleeping. I wouldn't be able to sleep. I'm so claustrophobic. I can't. There are nights where I have to throw the blanket off of me because that's too constricting. Like I couldn't do a tight sleeping bag.
It's good that your body or your brain paralyzes your body while you sleep, or else you would have no other choice, or I would
sleep in a padded room. I would just sleep in a padded room.
Walk from the outside, and you have to call someone to let you out or something. Like that would be, I just wanted to share that's a thing that some people don't have.
Yeah, I had no idea. But oftentimes this moment of sleep paralysis can be accompanied by hallucinations, which researchers believe is just caused by basically a harmless neurological disturbance happening in this moment. But people often report one of the most commonly reported sleep paralysis hallucinations is seeing a dark figure somewhere in your room, whether it's standing over you or standing in the doorway or moving across the room or oftentimes approaching you slowly. Some people have reported them climbing on the walls and ceilings, and it's almost always accompanied by feelings of intense fear or apprehension or danger. Another natural but frightening explanation for the shadow person hallucination is, as it turns out, meth. So interestingly, methamphetamine addicts will often report hallucinating shadow people, especially if they haven't slept in a while, which sleep deprivation is common with people who are addicted to methamphetamine, and they will report seeing shadow people. There was a Phoenix New Times article that specifically dove into this topic, and one addict reported, "You don't see shadow dogs or shadow birds or shadow cars. You see shadow people standing in doorways, walking behind you, coming at you on the sidewalk." And researchers believe that this is largely due to the fact that not only does meth often induce sleep deprivation and hallucinations, but it also introduces an element of paranoia. So that may be specifically why those are the hallucinations that you see and why they feel that way, that you're not just hallucinating a person, it's a shadow person and they're here to hurt you. But then there are the less scientific and more out there explanations for shadow people. And there are a lot of different thoughts on this. But a lot of people believe that shadow people, whether it's the phenomenon of seeing them in sleep paralysis or if it's a peripheral vision version, but regardless, they believe that shadow people are a supernatural phenomenon. There's an author and just general person who studies spirits and spiritualism named Heidi Hollis, who has written extensively on shadow people. She believes them to be negative presences, but also believes that they can be warded off by invoking the name of Christ. She has an entire book that deals with the concept of shadow people. But a more common idea, or just a more specific idea about them in the supernatural community, is that these are lost spirits, which is, the idea of someone who has died but hasn't realized that they're dead and hasn't fully accepted that state of being. So as a result, their energy appears to people who are able to see spirits as a manifestation of sadness, darkness, or angry energy, which just becomes a shadow, and especially a featureless shadow, because they haven't accepted what they are and they don't understand what they are, so they aren't able to, their soul is not able to properly project itself. Other paranormal researchers believe that shadow figures are specifically demonic, especially attributed to the fact that people who see them report dark thoughts or feelings of intense fear. And then there's a whole other school of thought that believes the idea that shadow people could potentially be either aliens or interdimensional beings of some sort. There's the idea that they're aliens and that they use these shadow figure appearances as disguises. But then there's the more specific theory that either they're aliens or astral beings of some kind, perhaps time travelers, or just otherwise people who have slipped from one dimension into another. And the idea behind this is that were there to be some sort of interdimensional travel, if someone were to, whether it be on purpose or by accident, if someone were to slip from one dimension into another, it would create a disturbance, especially in human beings who were around to perceive it. So the idea is they appear strangely to you because they are from another dimension and you physically cannot comprehend what you're seeing and what the feelings around that are. So it comes across as negative feelings, or the fear or the feeling of being in danger, and they just appear to you as kind of like a nonsensical blob. And this especially applies to not only shadow people or shadow figures in a human form, but oftentimes you'll hear the concept of a black mass or just a black shape or a black fog. This kind of also falls in the same idea, that anything that appears as just sort of a featureless black mass falls within one of these theories. But have you ever had an experience with a shadow person? I mean, not even like a specific, oh, I'm seeing a ghost, but I can think of a couple instances, and specific ones that I even remember where I thought I was seeing something. I remember one instance before I left for college, when I was still living at my parents' house. My parents live in the middle of the woods in rural Pennsylvania, so there's nobody around, and if you step outside, it is pitch black outside. And I remember a late night that I think I'd let the dog out, and I was waiting for the dog to come back in, standing kind of at the mouth of our garage. And I happened to look around the corner a little bit, and I'm sure it was just my eyes bugging out a little bit, but I couldn't see anything. There was no moon that night, there was no stars, it was just pitch black. But 4 feet away from me, I saw, or at least thought that I saw very distinctly, a human height figure move toward me for a second, and I thought I was gonna shit myself. Like I freaked out. I stumbled back into the garage and was like almost on the verge of tears because I thought somebody was out there. It didn't even occur to me like, oh, there's a ghost or an interdimensional being. Like that I thought someone was there, that someone had come to our house in the middle of the night. Because I mean, as I've talked about on the podcast before, home invasion and the idea of people attacking you in the middle of the night is my biggest fear. So that was immediately what my brain jumped to. But then I realized that there was nobody there. So I kind of left that feeling with this weird unsureness of, yes, my eyes were probably just playing tricks on me, but also what was that? Because it was so, for just a second, I mean, I've spent this entire portion talking about what it probably was and what my brain was probably doing, but in the moment, I was just so determined that I had seen the outline of a person and that they were stepping toward me, and it was utterly terrifying.
I've never had any experiences like that where I'm in living my everyday life, doing my thing, and then there's this figure that I perceive. But I did have the unfortunate pleasure of having the brain that I have as a child. When I was a child, where almost every night before I'd go to bed, of course, it would be, and it's not even that I would see anything. It's more like, what you described in the beginning of your segment with our mind is making sense of these objects in the dark, and they are prone to making them human because that is what our brains like to do. But sometimes it was even just the possibility that I was going to look in this space and there was going to be a thing that I couldn't see, didn't know what it was. Like, that is what instilled that fear in me. It's not even that I ever experienced it, but it's like the possibility that I could.
Yeah. No, anytime that I would be laying in bed at night and having one of those moments where your mind kind of runs away with you and does the whole, wouldn't it be creepy if kind of thing, and then suddenly you're afraid of this thing that's not even happening and isn't going to happen, 9 times out of 10, it was something like that. For me, it was the idea that I was going to be laying in bed and turn over and see somebody across, or like the shadow of somebody across my room, or that I would walk into a room and realize that there was somebody in the corner. It was always the shadow person for me. That's always the, wouldn't it be creepy if, it always has to deal with the idea of like a shadowy silhouette or something like that.
My brain went the extra step to say, wouldn't it be creepy if you looked over there and there was a thing? To do it, go look, you have to look, do it. You can't go to sleep unless you look to make sure.
Yeah.
That's what my brain was like. Yeah, I still, as a nearly 30-year-old person, cannot sleep, or I feel very uncomfortable sleeping with like a dark doorway.
Mm-hmm. My closet door has to be closed. If my closet door is at all cracked in the middle of the night, I'll have moments where I'm like, I'm gonna look over in that closet door and I'm gonna see a person, or like the shape of a person looking out at me. Or I get really, really obsessed with how much the door is open over the course of the night and whether or not it has changed.
Yeah, best to just have it closed, and then for sure there's a finite amount. Like, this is it. If it opens, that's the truth. I don't have to try to do spatial measuring in the middle of the dark after I just woke up in the middle of the night. But
life as a horror fan with anxiety.
Okay, if you're a horror fan without anxiety,
what are you even doing?
I don't believe that. I don't think you're real. That's a hot take. But do you think it's time for a twist ending?
I think it could be time for a twist ending. Let's twist.
In this episode, there's a scene where Moira is speaking to Vivian about how women have been portrayed as crazy throughout history, and like where these concepts come from, specifically, speaking about hysteria or being hysterical. Moira gives us a nugget of truth about the history of hysteria and where these terms come from and what they originally meant versus what they mean now. So I thought I would follow her with this nugget of truth. Not a lot, but some of what I'm going to say Moira already explains. So hysteria was a medical explanation for everything that men found mysterious or unmanageable in women. And because everything at the time, but especially medicine, was controlled by men, this was medicine to have this ideology. And then the word hysteria has also been used as a synonym, or it's continued to be used as a synonym for over-emotional and or deranged. So hysteria throughout history was a sex-selected disorder and only affected those people who have or had a uterus. So in this time of medical history, uteri were thought to be the basis of a variety of health problems. So ancient Egyptians and Greeks believed wombs were capable of affecting the rest of the body's health. In ancient Greece, it was believed that a uterus could migrate around the female body, placing pressure on other organs and causing a number of ill effects. This was called hysterical suffocation. And the uterus that was moving around the body was usually coaxed back into place by placing good smells near the vagina and bad smells near the mouth. And sneezing.
Aha. That tracks.
Another theory suggested that the retention of female seed, or, I don't even know what that would be defined as in these times, but do we assume it's the egg?
I'm assuming we're talking about menstruation here.
We don't have any control over that. How do you retain? Where's the retention of the female seed? Anyway, but retention of the egg within the womb was to blame for anxiety, insomnia, depression, irritability, fainting, and other symptoms that women experience, probably with PMS. Other theories blame the retention of menstrual blood for female problems, and the obvious solution was to purge the offending fluid. So marriage and its implied regular sexual intercourse was the general recommendation. Male semen was also believed to have healing properties, so sex served two purposes.
Of course it was.
A man's semen is going to heal you, but also you're going to get pregnant, and then you're not going to release as much blood, so you're going to be healthy because you're pregnant and not having your period. Women who could not engage in heterosexual intercourse, whether they were widowed or didn't like heterosexual intercourse, or could not achieve orgasm through heterosexual intercourse, were treated by midwives who manually stimulated their genitals and released the offending fluids. So Moira does also talk a little bit about this in the episode as well. A 1637 text explains that when sexual fluids are not regularly released, the heart and surrounding areas are enveloped in a morbid and moist exudation, and that any lascivious females inclined to venery simply had a buildup of these fluids. So basically they're saying men or women who were very eager to have sex, otherwise horny, just had a buildup of these fluids that they had to have released. And if these fluids were not released, they were surrounding the heart and other areas and destroying the body from the inside out.
Well, how lucky for them that men just happen to have a resource of this wonderful healing fluid. That just, Jesus Christ. It's so transparent now.
Well, the fluids we're talking about here are not it's not semen. It's a woman's buildup of her own fluids that she has to have released.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying is like how lucky for them that on the flip side men also have this buildup of fluid, but it's the healing kind. Like they have the answer just naturally within them, whereas women naturally just have this problem that men have to solve. Like it's just so
poison. Yeah. Women are being poisoned by their own bodies while men can heal. Men have no problems and can heal other women, other people with their fluids. Like, it's, In 1880 France, a physician named Jean-Martin Charcot took a modern scientific sense to the female-only disease of hysteria. He lectured to his medical students, showing them photos and live subjects on the hysteria symptoms he believed were caused by an unknown internal injury affecting the nervous system. One of these medical students was none other than Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis. Freud, who was working with his partner Breuer in Austria, developed Charcot's theories further and wrote several studies on female hysteria from 1880 to 1915. He believed that hysteria was a result not of a physical injury on the body, but of a psychological scar produced through trauma or repression. That's very on point with Freud. Specifically, this psychological damage was a result of removing male sexuality from females, an idea that stems from Freud's Oedipal moment of recognition associated with when young women realize that they don't have a penis and they want one really bad, and they are afraid of how they lost their penis. In Freud fashion, a woman can regain a penis by marrying one or giving birth to one.
I see. Okay.
Yeah. So that's Freud. We're leaving Freud where he is. Moving on to someone who actually is doing good things for women in a very roundabout way. So invented by a Swedish army major named Thurbrant, uterine massage quickly became the norm for treating everything in women, from a tilted uterus to nymphomania. Women were stimulated until a paroxysmal convulsion, otherwise orgasm, was achieved. These sessions were considered long and physically exhausting for doctors for obvious reasons, which led to the creation of the vibrator. And I guess we have this to thank for vibrators. Until 1980, which is, that's 40 years ago. Until 1980, 40 years ago, hysteria was a formally studied psychological disorder that could be found in the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, otherwise known as the DSM, which is what modern-day therapists use to diagnose their patients. So up until 40 years ago, someone could be diagnosed with hysteria.
Wow.
Thank you for joining us this week. We hope that you enjoyed learning about the American horror genre and the horror history that inspire the genre. If you like what you heard this week, please subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts.
You can also find us on TikTok at FilthyGD Horror Show, Instagram at FilthyGD Horror Show, Twitter at FilthyGD Horror, and on YouTube, where you can listen to full episodes. You can also email us your questions and suggestions at filthygdhorrorshow@gmail.com.
Please consider donating to our featured charity this week. Links to that can be found in the episode description. This show isn't sponsored by this or any other organization. We just like to shout out good people doing good things.
Now, if you have not watched the latest episode of American Horror Story Season 10 Double Feature, this is the end of the podcast for you. Otherwise, stay tuned for our reactions to the latest episode of Double Feature, and tune in next week where we will be exploring episode 9 of American Horror Story Murder House on
It's a filthy goddamn horror show.
All right. American Horror Story Season 10 Double Feature, Episode 7, Take Me to Your Leader. Thoughts, Monique?
Quick change of pace from Red Tide.
Indeed.
I mean, I'm not disappointed. I think for the most part, I'm relatively impressed. And kind of excited to see what the rest of the season has to offer. Maybe there were a few campy moments I could have lived without. Intriguing concept.
Mm-hmm. I like that it's a double feature within a double feature. Now, I wonder if that's going to be continued throughout the rest of the episodes, that half the episode is set in the 50s and it's in black and white, and then the other half jumps ahead to the modern day stuff.
I do like that as well. I think, I don't know necessarily how invested I was. I mean, obviously I was intrigued by the first half of the episode, but I couldn't help but think, what does this mean in the context of what we've already learned about American Horror Story in previous seasons, not just earlier in Double Feature. We get to see some of our favorite actors, playing new roles within this season.
And interesting roles from some iconic, or just like Americana in terms of significant historical figures. We get a president, a first lady, and Amelia Earhart, all in this first episode, and that's acknowledging the fact that we're still going to get Marilyn Monroe and at least one more president, I believe. So I'm interested to see what our mainstays are going to be doing for the rest of this season and what ridiculous historical figures they're going to be playing.
What a twist! What a complete 180 turn for Sarah Paulson, though. To go from, TB Karen to the First Lady. And poor Lily Rabe, just infinitely pregnant in this season. Just
perpetually pregnant.
Doesn't get a moment.
Under bad circumstances, too.
Every time.
Just constantly pregnant in duress.
Which is maybe the worst way to be pregnant.
I would say so.
And then I think maybe one of my least favorite ways to end an episode of revealing this huge, kind of ridiculous revelation and then just going to black.
I can deal with a cliffhanger. Especially on a TV show. But sometimes the cliffhangers don't feel entirely earned. Like, we knew that the boys were pregnant for several scenes. For at least 5 minutes, if not more, leading up until the last second where they said all 4 of us are pregnant. And with everything that came before it in the episode, exploding heads, a flying saucer crash site, an abduction in the middle of the fucking desert, I feel like I wanted a slightly more impactful ending, but really that's my only major qualm with the episode.
It's a Filthy Goddamn Horror Show is created by Monique Quistorf and Nathan Skethway. Nathan also edits and mixes our show.
To find out about the music used in this episode, check out our website at filthygdhorrorshow.com. It's a Filthy Goddamn Horror Show is a podcast created by American Horror Story fans and is in no way affiliated with the show.